Hey, good morning, everyone. I know a few more people are signing in. Hope you guys can hear me. And we our normal tech team contingent group is not available today, but we are adapting. We are going to have Carol Kosri kind of help out and the others. So hope to try to run things here smoothly. So if you do sign in, I think most of you are really good. Make sure, please rename yourself to a first and last name. I'll try to help you if I can. Couple reminders before we get started. June 6th is our holiday picnic here at the extension office for your calendars. The sign up for the 2024 Master Gardener class is well, that ended a while back. We're full. It's going to start here in a few weeks. We're going to have an orientation here in a couple of weeks, but I do want to let you know for some of the groups committees that we have our job fair on July 13th. It'll be probably in the afternoon on July 13th. That's a Saturday. Next year, if we do it the same format, we'll probably have the mandatory sessions on a Sunday, but the format might change. We might do it all in person next year. We'll see. That's going to be based on the feedback that we get from this year. Also, to let you know that many of you have completed, and if you haven't completed it yet, your background check from Sterling. They're still sending that out. Not everyone has gotten one. When they do come, sometimes they're in your spam or your junk folder. Please check there. When you do get it, there's only like 72 hours. You got to fill it back in quickly. Renew might help me out a little bit here because she just recently got it and completed hers.
Yep.
So just keep an eye out for that. Again, they're sending them out in batches because there's like 10,000 volunteers, and I think they send them out a batch of 1,000 or 2 at a time. So it's been over a period of time. Some people did theirs a while back. Some people just got theirs. Some people still haven't got theirs. So sorry that it's confusing, but that's kind of the way they do it. It's as many they can manage as a time as what they send out, I think is what they do. The other thing is I'm going to try to switch over here real quick and show you there's some volunteer opportunities with MCPS. I just learned about it. I was talking with Carol Kosri about it. Some of them are next week, and what I'm going to do is put it up on the screen, and then we'll probably get it maybe emailed out to you. So let me try and shift that over to you real quick. You go over here. Right here. So I just found out about literally less than 15, 20 minutes ago. So we're probably going to be doing more things with MCPS, the Smith Center, places like that. Let me get this on full screen. Okay. Almost. Self-presenter mode. There we go. So the Smith Center is not too far away from the extension office. I think it's a place where, some of the MCPS students have to come each year. I mean, not each year. I think it's a group of, I guess, fourth graders come there, and they come throughout the whole year. And they're looking to do some environmental design, restoration there with Ann English, who was our speaker, I think, last month. She's going to be there May 9th and 10th. Working more closely with MCPS. They have a new person there on board who is Harris Trobman, who's focused with teaching environmental education throughout MCPS schools on their outdoor gardens and areas like the Smith Center. So that's a new position they've had. So that's why you're seeing more of this happening. So there's a greater focus from MCPS on environmental education, and we're just trying to collaborate them whenever we can. Some of these days are just new to me. I'm going to get, with Renew's help, we'll try to send this out. I'll probably send an email out, put it on our website. So I did ask Harris for the point of contact in there. So if it's something you're available, it's close to you, maybe your kids, or maybe you went to Pinecrest Elementary or Tacoma Park Elementary, maybe have maybe a vested interest in there, That's up there. And I think at this point, I need to hand it over to our supreme leader over here, knowing of all things Renew. So,
I try my best. I try my best. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our May monthly meeting. Thank you for that very emphasized introduction. I don't know if I can top that. This morning, I'll keep the announcements very brief because we have a lot of people to recognize this month. So, quick reminder for the Speakers Bureau, we are continuing to recruit schedulers and speakers. We're also looking for volunteers for our upcoming garden educator-led tours of the demo garden. We especially need volunteers May 15th, 16th, and 17th. And I'll round out with our upcoming plant swap. So the plant swap will be held on May 9th at the fairgrounds starting at 12 noon.
Here we go. Just a reminder, our spring plant swap is Thursday. That's next Thursday, May 9th at noon at the fairgrounds. So please, if you haven't already, pot up your plants. Give them a few days to sit in their new pot and get their roots settled down. And then bring them. Remember, we also take books and other things. So just bring whatever you have for the plant swap. And that's at the fairgrounds at noon. And I'm not sure anybody mentioned this today. The Master Gardener Picnic is going to be at Durwood on Thursday, June 6th. It'll be at noon. So please start thinking about what you'd like to bring. I know Carol sent out an email for people to start signing up that they're coming and what they're going to bring to the picnic. And as Gloria just said, we will have pins available for the people that earn them this year for 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30 years. We all also have pins if you missed picking them up last year. So if you need a pin, there'll be a table right outside the Durwood area for you to pick up all that stuff. And if you have any questions, you can take and email me.
There's information in the May issue of The Seed, and for all of the announcements that I just mentioned, you can also look for details in our written announcements that Carol so kindly captures for us every month. So with that, I will turn the virtual mic over to Gloria to complete our recognitions for the month. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Renew. Just so you know, today I have Linda Barrett assisting me with the slide presentation in the absence of the tech team. And thank you very much, Linda, for saving the day for me. Today we are honoring Master Gardeners for their years of service, the 5, 10, 15, and so on through 30 years of service. So we begin with the class of 2019, our 5-year Master Gardeners. The pandemic impacted everyone, especially interns and new Master Gardeners who were looking for volunteer opportunities. So thankfully, everyone persevered and got their 5 hours, 5 years, and congratulations to each of you on reaching this 5-year milestone. And so we'd like to recognize Danielle Brabazon, Elaine Clark, Kyrie Clark, Sheila Grant, Gail Green, Claire King, Kathleen King, Christy Morano McGee, Virginia Morgan, Donna O'Keefe, Mary Olson, Frank Perrier, Judy Perrier, Laura Retta, Barbara Sanders, Joan Stroth, Gail Shannon, Suji Singh, Sandy Staples, Kevin Stemp, Wendy Thomas, Jackie Weaver, Kathleen Wilcox, Marianne Wingley, and Betsy Wooster. And moving on to the class of 2014, our 10-year people. They've used their leadership skills in various capacities these past 10 years. We congratulate and thank this group of 18 Master Gardeners for all they have done. And the class includes Eileen Altman, Dara Ballo-Giffen, Leah Cesari, Benita Condon, Steve Coster, Diane Ingensberger, Patricia Ang, James Everhart, Leanne Gilletley, Anna Heyman, Dorothy So, Gail Ifshin, Dawn Landsman, Margaret Ann Ruth, Peggy Stanford, Jafar Vasugi, Heather Worley, and Karen Millett. And now for the class of 2009, our 15-year Master Gardeners. They've accepted leadership roles such as board membership, Speakers Bureau, and much more. They readily use their knowledge and skills to inform and help county residents. And congratulations to each of you on 15 years of service. Catherine Kahn, Colleen Ward, Diamond Rahman, Michael Pariser, Emily Hill, Jack Sia, John Thomas, Kathleen Dyer, Nadine Neal, Vivian Burke, and Wendy Bell. Congratulations to each of you on that significant milestone. And now for our 20-year Master Gardeners, the class of 2004. We asked them to share some of their thoughts and experiences after 20 years of service. And they had a lot to say about that. Mary Couch has worked in therapeutic horticulture. The thing she values most is helping residents reconnect with nature. And these are people who live in assisted living or other healthcare facilities. So therapeutic horticulture brings garden-related projects to these people each month. And I loved what Mary said, that at the end of the sessions, everyone is smiling and they're very proud of the work they've done. Stanley Fisher says that Master Gardeners, the whole organization, helps promote a unique and healthy dimension to life. And he says it also has offered him great horticulture education experience. And here's a theme you may see running through lots of our Master Gardeners' comments. The camaraderie of 20 years, so many friendships formed and lasting relationships just because of Master Gardeners and our shared goals. Carol Martin has worked in the Germantown Plant Clinic, and she enjoys interacting with the public. Actually, through all of her many experiences, she says her heart has been in the shade garden. And every time I visit the shade garden, I think of Carol and the other workers who keep it in such a great condition. She also co-leads at the plant clinic and the shade garden. And Baby McMeekin, she has worn many hats through the years, but she expressed her great lifelong learning experience, how she loves volunteering, and her favorite part has been the people and the friendships made. Okay, And we'll see some more of our 20-year people. Alice Lothorpe. She said, wow, 20 years, time does fly. She said, I've learned so much in the Master Gardener program and from my fellow Master Gardeners. I enjoy sharing our passion for plants and growing things, and the sense of camaraderie and community I feel when we are sharing things we've learned with the gardeners and would-be gardeners that we interact with at our volunteer events. And then Kate Crawford said, I've had various experiences, including guiding elementary school groups through the butterfly exhibit at Brookside Gardens. And for 3 years, she recruited speakers for the Montgomery County Master Gardeners monthly meetings, reaching out to authors of books she had read, contacting garden centers, and she invited Doug Ptolemy of the University of Delaware to speak on 2 different occasions. She's also worked in therapeutic horticulture, she thinks, for about 18 years. And it's a pleasure, she says. She enjoys the other Master Gardeners in her group, and I especially working with the residents in the healthcare facilities. I love talking to them and getting to know them. And I find by doing something for others, I receive way more than I give. And Gloria Sherman said, so many things to be grateful for during these 20 years, mostly meeting and forming wonderful friendships. But some of the highlights that stood out to her were volunteering in the demo garden and the Gaithersburg Fair Garden, volunteering at the Washington National Cathedral information booth, and attending 3 trips of the International Master Gardener Conference. And of course, here's that theme again, wonderful friendships made. And Barbara Waite Jakes has been the chair of the Twinbrook Plant Clinic. She's been the chair of social events, Harvest Festival. She's been a Montgomery County Master Gardener Vice President. She also answers questions under the Ask Master Gardeners. And friendships made. Looking forward to in-person meetings to make new friends. I like that too. That's another theme I heard a lot. Okay, and continuing with our 20-year people, Judith Grafe. She's worked in therapeutic horticulture, served on the board, worked at the spring conference, close encounters with agriculture, the fairgrounds, and the Holiday Park Senior Center plant room. And I learned more about that as I was talking to Judith, the good work they do there. And then she said, people you work with, that's what matters the most. And finally, Karen Eppinger. She has worked in close encounters with agriculture, the spring conference, fall festival, fairgrounds, and also the Holiday Park Senior Center plant room. And this is just a sampling of all these fine Master Gardeners have done. And I'm sure I have left out some of the things, but you'll get a feel for how busy and how important this work is. They're all at work all the time. And now we're looking at the class of 1999 and folks that have the 25-year distinction today. Starting with Susan B. Anthony. Well, I learned a lot about something in the past, the 2004 Northeast Master Gardener Conference that was held in Baltimore. And Montgomery County Master Gardeners raised the funds to pay for that conference. I had no idea. Susan chaired this 4-year assignment. What a task. And she solicited vendor donations from companies, a lot of companies, and from Master Gardener programs across the state. And with those donations, they were able to stock the auction and the gift shop. And money raised from those were used to float the conference. And it was a pretty big number, something in the neighborhood of $35,000, I think. Anyway, what a success story with a lot of hard work behind it. So amazing job. And Holly Stover, she's also a 25-year person, finds therapeutic horticulture a very rewarding experience. And that's what they're in it for. The rewarding experience that they pass on to others. She's worked in plant clinics at the fairgrounds, close encounters with agriculture, harvest festival, and she enjoys the outreach and sharing horticulture information with the community. And continuing with our 25-year people, 2 more. On the left, you're going to see Paula Jean Halberg, also known as PJ, and her husband at Zion National Park. That was earlier this year, I think February, and they were celebrating an anniversary, maybe 30 years, I think. Paula Jean has worked at the fairgrounds. She's been a Speakers Bureau chair. Close Encounters with Agriculture, also known as CEWA, and that's where I first met her. And in that program, they work to align the lessons with the Frederick County Public School curriculum. As you know, it's 4th graders that visit the Durwood location each fall, and they learn all sorts of amazing things. One of the challenges is getting those lessons in the small time frame in which they have the students. It's one whole morning. She especially enjoys the camaraderie and also wishes and hopes for in-person meetings someday. And next we have Helen Pacheco, and she's worked in therapeutic horticulture, leading at the Holy Cross Nursing Home in Silver Spring. She's also worked in the demo garden at Durwood, Close Encounters with Agriculture, the butterfly exhibit at Brookside Gardens, plant clinics at Brookside and Wheaton Libraries. And she says that Montgomery County Master Gardeners support her values. And that includes taking care of the earth, teaching, and lifelong learning. And she says, I have felt proud of being a Montgomery County Master Gardener for 25 years. I hope all of you feel proud of what you've done in that amount of time. And now for the 1994 30-year Master Gardeners, and we have 2 to recognize today. The first is Joanne Mueller. And we're going to quote her exact words. She says, I have thoroughly enjoyed my 30 years as a Master Gardener. I've worked with many wonderful fellow volunteers while increasing my own knowledge of all things gardening. While trying the phones and plant clinics, most of my first years were in the Durwood Demo Garden. Joe Ginther and I chaired it for 3 years, she said, and I continued working there for another 15 years. Other activities included Close Encounters and the spring and fall festivals. I enjoyed children's garden activities, and most recently, I volunteer at the Tussie Mussy Station. Working at the fair, contact with both adults and children has also been rewarding. Dearest to me is therapeutic horticulture. Chairing the committee, leading workshops, mentoring new volunteers, and starting new programs. And I now lead at 2 senior facilities. It's a pleasure to bring knowledge and joy of nature to seniors who have very little opportunity for this life-enriching activity. Thank you, Joanne, for all you've done, and you've meant a lot to so many people through the years, volunteers and residents alike. And finally, in the class of 1994, 30 years, Marie Rojas says, and these are her words that we're quoting, I've worn many hats over my Master Gardener years and volunteered in many capacities. My favorite activity is definitely public speaking engagements. I love presenting garden talks to people and getting them excited about all things horticultural. One of my most meaningful experiences was helping put on the one and only Celebrate the Earth Day years ago. It was a full day of fun, earth friendly activities for the whole family that we hosted at the Extension office. We only did it that one year, but it was really spectacular. It sounds like it, Marie, and I wish I could have been there. I'm sure a lot of people remember that. So, a couple of things I want to say is again, congratulations to all of you. I learned so much about you during this time of gathering information. Um, your accomplishments are outstanding to say the least. And also to tell you that service pins, you'll get a pin for each of you who have been recognized today, and service pins will be available for pickup at the picnic. So be sure to stop by the table if you come to the picnic. Otherwise, we'll save them for you to pick up later at the Durwood office. And now I'd like to hand it over to Linda. Thanks again for helping me, and I'll hand it over to her.
I'd like to introduce Katie Evans. She's a fourth-year student, PhD student in Anhai Espindola's lab at the University of Maryland, working on pollinator ecology and the effects of agricultural practices on plant fitness and pollinator interactions. She obtained her bachelor's from the University of Florida, where she worked for APHIS as an Africanized honeybee technician. She obtained her master's in entomology at the University of Delaware, where she studied sustainable varroa mite management practices of honeybees and how brood cycle interruptions in a colony's life cycle affect in-hive colony dynamics. She worked as a technician for the Penn State Entomology Center for Pollinator Research for a few years before beginning her PhD at the University of Maryland. And talking to Katie the other day, I was very excited to hear her presentation because she's going to talk to us about some of those things we don't know, some of the bugs we don't know. So take it away, Katie.
Okay, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you, Linda, for the kind introduction. So I'm going to jump into it, and I'm going to talk to you today about the underappreciated pollinators of Maryland. And a quick outline, I'm going to introduce pollination as an ecosystem service. I'll talk a bit about pollinator diversity, and then I'm going to jump into Maryland pollinators and what I'll call our underappreciated pollinators. And then I'm going to end with a really cool study on urban community gardens and how they impact ecosystem services in our urban environments. And I'll take questions probably at the end, but when I get excited about a topic and on Zoom, I tend to talk very fast. And so if I'm talking too quick, just please feel free to unmute yourself and just say, Katie, please slow down, because I'm not reading the chat. So yeah, please do that. So I'm excited to chat with you today, though, about this topic. So just as your master gardeners, but just as a brief reminder, pollination is the act of transferring pollen grains from the male anther of the flower to the female stigma. And there's different types of pollination. Our conifers and grasses, which make up about 12% of the plant community, is pollinated by wind. We have aquatic pollination, hydrophily, which makes up only about 2%. And this is an example, this American pondweed up here. You see these white flowers. And water is just emitted from the flowers, and it travels via pollen's emitted from the flowers, it travels via water to their neighboring flower, and it's pollinated. And then angiosperms, which are flowering plants, make up the majority of our plant community, and they're reliant on biotic or animal pollination. And so that's what I'm going to focus on today for this talk. And to some degree, we are all aware of the benefits of animal pollination. So there's a little honeybee, for example, pollinating a blueberry flower. And so the presence of pollinators and the act of pollination will enhance a lot of our native plants in our surrounding community, and they enhance the production of our crops. But of course, there's many other pollinators besides just the honeybee. And you can see from this diagram at the bottom, flowers are very diverse. And so this diversity in flowers, in shape, and when they bloom is really linked to the diversity of pollinators. But this act of pollination, pollinators pollinate, how do we quantify, how do we put a value to that? And so pollination as an ecosystem service, it's only really been recognized as an ecosystem service in the last 2 or 3 decades or so, and compared to, for example, biological control that I feel has been recognized for several decades. So it's relatively new, and it's only in the last 5 years that the majority of studies have been published talking about pollination as an ecosystem service. So an ecosystem service is benefits that are received by humans from the natural world. For example, pollinators provide pollination services. And in America, we value that at about $200 billion a year. And this number is given to us through fancy equations from economists. I'm not going to get into all the equations. But here's just a common kind of public awareness campaign, if you will, that you see now. What's the secret to better berries? Wild bees. And so we've really seen an increase in this public awareness of pollinators since the early 2000s. And so this value, it's very easy to put a value in our agricultural systems and our cultivated plants. This value is easy to come by because pollination is directly linked to food production, to yields. 35% of our crops, for example, are dependent on animal pollination, and the monetary value of pollination, it varies by crop, it varies by the variety that's used, and it varies by how self-compatible the flower and the plant are. For example, here's a squash bee and a pumpkin flower, and a bumblebee and a blueberry flower. And these two crops are very highly reliant on pollinators for yield. And so the value of their services, of this pollination, is going to be very high relative, for example, to soybean. Soybean does benefit modestly from pollination, but pollinators are not needed. I quote, they're very good at self-fertilizing. And so there's about 100 or plus crops in the US that to some degree require visitation from insects, pollinators, mostly insects. That number was actually really hard to find. There's a lot of research in Europe, and less so in North America. And so this I'm varying a little bit from pollinators because I wanted to use an example that was a little more relatable. But you trying to find a value of pollination for wild plants is a bit trickier. It's hard to do. And fireflies and this rove beetle here are not pollinators, but they fit nicely into this example that I'm going to share with you. And so there's a lot of talk in the media and such about biodiversity. We're losing a lot of biodiversity. So how do we measure biodiversity? And that's what's tricky about it, putting a number to biodiversity, putting a number to pollination of our wild plants. And biodiversity, as it refers to everything from the diversity of genes all the way up to our ecosystems. And So we measure, one way to measure biodiversity, scientists are using these bioblitzes. And iNaturalist, for example, is a great tool that we're starting to use. And so in Greenbelt, there's every summer they have this firefly conservation area, and you can go and participate in these firefly bioblitzes and count the number of species and count the number of individuals per species and kind of monitor how these populations are doing over time. So that's something fun that many I know scientists from UMD go and participate in, and it's something residents can participate in. It's fun to go hang out with fellow nature lovers and count bugs, I think. and so, but again, how do we put a monetary value on pollination, on insects, on biodiversity for recreational purposes, for medicinal purposes, and they're very important to our food webs and food chains. There is an example of a little rove beetle, and they're investigating this beetle for cancer drugs. So it's just a fun fact. So why do we need so many pollinators? Why do we need so much pollinator biodiversity? And food webs can partially answer this question. And so over the last 100 years or so, there's been declines in our wild plant communities and our pollinators. And there's actually a really cool study released this month in the Netherlands showing over the last 100 years or so, there's been a huge decline in plants pollinated by insects. So the plant communities have shifted away from insect pollinated plants. And we see this throughout the world. We see an increase in hermaphroditic plants. We see an increase in wind pollinated plants and self-fertile species. And this really has an impact on ecosystem stability. So here's our diurnal pollinators. They're responsible for visiting a lot of flowers. Those flowers produce seeds that feed birds, and the birds directly also feed on the pollinators, for example, flies. And then, our nocturnal pollinators, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit about later on, our moths, are also responsible for a lot of pollination of these plants. And our moths are important food source for bats. And so you can see that a disruption in these flowering plants would really cause a problem in our stability of our ecosystems. And that's kind of what we're seeing. I'm happy to send you resources and papers also at the end of the talk. I can email you those if you want to read some of those papers. They're pretty cool. So I just wanted to give an example of a food web that's a bit closer to home, right in our backyards. In Maryland, all our bat species fall into this Microchioptera group of bats that eat insects. And moths actually are a big part of their diet. And so having plants around that moths will visit and supporting our moth community actually directly supports our bat communities, and our bats provide a very valuable ecosystem of biocontrol. So that was something fun I found when I was investigating nocturnal pollination. So I'm going to jump a little bit now into Maryland pollinators. And when I Googled, Maryland pollinators, I go to the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. What comes up is, I feel like, something we're all very familiar with. Lots of bees, lots of butterflies and skippers, and one of our only bird pollinators is the ruby-throated hummingbird. But what you see in fine text kind of at the bottom are other pollinators. And that's kind of what I wanted to focus on a little for this talk, is what I'm going to call our forgotten pollinators. There's 150 butterflies documented in Maryland. Well, there's more than 10 times that amount of documented moths. There's 2,500 plus documented moths. And I had a hard time finding actually research on moth pollination and nocturnal pollination because it's just understudied. And same with wasps. There's double the amount of wasps than there are bees. And flies, there's a bunch of, and there's about 200 or so beetles in Maryland. So a lot of insect biodiversity, and the pollinator community, pollinator researchers tend to focus a little bit on bees. But that's starting to change a little bit. But I did want to introduce bees because they are important pollinators, and just why they're such an efficient pollinator. And it's because they have they're covered in hairs. You can see here this little halictid hanging out in a rudbeckia. And as it's actively collecting pollen to bring back to its nest, it coats its body in these hairs, partially accidentally. And then as it visits flower to flower, it's very efficient at pollinating pollinating the flowers, sharing this pollen. And bees have evolved with these angiosperms. So they have this very special relationship. They've co-evolved. And bees, you know, a lot of flowers, your blueberries and your tomatoes, you know, the pollen is very sticky, it's very wet. And so it requires a special type of pollination. It requires this buzz pollination. So it's where the bee comes and it shakes the flower vigorously, and you can hear it actually from afar. It's a pretty fun to listen to. And the pollen is shaken loose, it's collected by the bee. And so bees have evolved to have this special relationship with some of these plants. And the flower traits usually for bees are colorful flowers. They have these UV tongue guides because bees can see UV light. They tend to have high nectar rewards, and they tend to flower during the day. And so just put briefly, some fun bee species that you'll see right now. You have a lot of endurinids that are out and about, and you can see them through these nests. They nest in the ground, and a lot of people will mistaken these for ant nests, but they're actually bees. And so they're pretty cool to see pop up out of the ground. And so, for example, important plant species for these spring pollinators would be things that bloom early. Your trees actually play an important role providing floral resources for these pollinators. I feel like trees get overlooked a little bit when they talk about the importance of plants and feeding our pollinators. Trees do play a big part in that. I love the megachilidae, which are your leaf cutting bees. I think they're just adorable. Here's a little video when I was out in my plots. I think of them as kind of more cavity dwellers, but this little bee you'll see down here in the corner was actually nesting in one of my potted plants, and I thought it was adorable. But there's 73 species in Maryland, and there it goes into the hole, and it collects these leaves and it lines the interior of their nest with them. And they're super loud. You can hear them pollinating from afar. And then the bumblebees, they definitely, you know, we're very well aware of how important bumblebees are to pollination. But when I was out in my plots, for example, I was doing some floral visitors of different flowers, and I was surprised at that these bumblebee species had very discrete preferences for certain plants. And so, for example, when I was doing my clover, I was looking at what bees are visiting my clover. I didn't really get any bombus impatiens. I got most of my visitors were actually this Pennsylvanicus, the American bumblebee. And so I encourage you to go out in your yard, and if you see some bumblebees, they're pretty easy to ID because they're so big, to try to figure out what species are hanging out and about in your gardens, because the Pennsylvanicus is not doing too well. They're starting to decline a little bit from habitat loss and such. So some fun. So these are plants that provide nesting sites for your megachilids. And I put a little barcode down here at the corner if you want to take a photo, or I can send you the link afterwards. But it lists all the nesting plants, all the plants that provide nesting habitats for this megachilid. So megachilids are generalist bees. They're those leafcutter bees. They visit a lot of plants, but where do they actually nest? So if you want to create habitat for your bees, I would say these are some important plants to include because they actually nest there, while also providing floral resources. And here's a picture of their nests. And so I know I was talking to a master gardener in Greenbelt, and she's trying to encourage gardeners and such to not prune so much when to not remove as many twigs and such, because those twigs and those kind of I guess debris of your plants, they do sometimes house these megachilids. So I'm going to jump into now cantharphily, which is pollination by beetles. And I feel like we don't hear a lot about beetle pollination. And that's because most of the beetle pollination takes place near the equator. But, you know, of the world's about 350,000 or so flowering plants, some believe that beetles are believed to be responsible for visiting and pollinating like 90% of them. And I found that number in a paper, but I think the point is that beetles are abundant. They're visiting a lot of different plants, and so they're probably also pollinating a lot of different plants. And they're very old. They're some of the first largest order of insects, and they're among the first flower visiting insects. They were around long before bees, and so they've had a long time to establish this relationship with flowering plants. And you can see we have quite a few worldwide, about 77,000 species that visit crops and wild plants. And I'll give you a few examples of beetle pollinated plants in the Maryland area. I'll try to bring it back to home a little bit. But the flowers, beetles use these flowers for feeding. They feed on the pollen. So usually these flowers don't have a lot of nectar rewards, because beetles don't really, they have chewing mouth parts, so they don't really use nectar. They eat pollen. They use it for mating. They use it for shelter and predation. They're hanging out in the flower waiting for another insect probably to come along so they can snag it and eat it. And they also eat the flower parts. They feed on the stigmatic secretions. So a lot of your traits, flower traits associated with beetle pollination, is the flowers tend to be large and bowl-shaped. Here's a carrion flower in the corner here. They tend, not all of them, but sometimes they tend to smell. I know the carrion's flower kind of smells like rotting meat at times. My supervisor has one, and for 2 weeks, she has to stick it outside because it just stinks up the whole house. And I went to visit it one year, and I thought it was awesome because I could see all these cool carrion beetles hanging out in the flower, and they were very attracted to that smell of rotting meat. And so some of our better pollinators of the beetles are these soldier beetles and the longhorn beetle. And this is for multiple reasons. They're a bit hairier, and they also tend to avoid the reproductive parts compared to like your Japanese beetle, which pretty much is it's a scarab and it's hanging out on the flower, pretty much devours the entire flower. So probably, as a specific example, not the best pollinator. And these tend to just hang out on the flower, eat some of the pollen, and move on, and not disrupt the reproductive parts. And so an example locally is the beetles and the magnolias. And so there's about 52 plant species that are beetle pollinated in North America. Magnolia is one of them. And so these beetles, this is a longhorn beetle. It hangs out in the magnolia flower, and it's feeding on these stigmatic secretions that's secreted by the stigma. And when this beetle starts feeding on the stigma, the flower releases pollen. And so the beetle is coated in pollen. And then once it's done feeding, it travels to the next flower and will pollinate the next flower. And a fun, unique thing about magnolia flowers is apparently they heat up. And as they create a bit of heat, these scented oils that they release, they kind of volatilize and they disperse this odor. And this odor is what attracts beetles. So it's kind of a fun relationship, and we have a lot of grandifolia hanging out in Maryland. So it'd be fun to go out during the summer and check out what's visiting these flowers when they start to bloom. Two crops that are beetle pollinated in North America are the pawpaw, which is fairly common around here. You see it in well-drained soils and forest floors. I'm not going to lie, I have not heard of the Antimoya before, and researching it, apparently it's native to Miami, Florida, but this is also a beetle pollinated flower, and you can see it's very bowl shaped. I wonder if it smells or not, but those were two examples I found in North America. So flies represent another really important group of underappreciated pollinators, I'll say. And there's two groups here, the syrphid flies and the bombylids. And they represent up to like 70% of pollination of global crops and wildflowers, specifically in Europe, because we don't have a lot of data about syrphids in North America right now. But what makes syrphid flies so good at pollinating is that the females require pollen or nectar for ovary development. So they're forced to go to the flower and to feed on pollen and nectar. And you can see here's just an image of some syrphid flies in North America. And down here we have a bombylid. And what makes them unique in the fly world and efficient pollinators is that they have these specialized mouth parts. You can see its long protrusion there that forces them to pretty much exclusively feed on nectar, and they tend to be super hairy, so you can see some maybe pollen grains hanging out on the fly. So between these two flies, research has shown them to be pretty important pollinators. We have 812 syrphids in the United States and Canada. There's 6,000 syrphids globally, and within Maryland, I think we have about 100 or so. So a paper that came out looked at syrphid fly diversity in southern Illinois, and it caught a bunch of syrphids, it ID'd them, and it also recorded their pollen carrying capacity of each of these species, and they rated them. And so Toxomerus is a very common species you see in agricultural areas and probably disturbed habitats. Its larvae are really good biocontrol agents, but they were shown to have very low pollen carrying capacities compared to this Astralis. This was a very relatively high pollen carrying capacity, and apparently this is equivalent to about the amount of pollen that a honeybee carries. And you can see, this variation in species. It's almost the size of like a drone honeybee, maybe slightly smaller. So they're pretty big. They're very hairy. So the flower traits associated with syrphids, if you wanted to try to attract some syrphids to your garden, are white, are yellow flowers. They bloom during the day. Mustard and carrot families, you can commonly see these on. I caught a few on my black-eyed Susans in my wildflower plot. Small flowering herbs, and they're really efficient pollinators of strawberries and celery. But another pro to syrphids, which makes them sometimes they fill a different ecological niche than our bees, is that they're highly mobile. There's a few species that are migratory. They have these mass migratory events. And in Europe, there was a study showing that these mass migratory events contribute significantly to the pollination and the wild plant fitness. And so they're able to disperse through these migratory events, and just through syrphids flying, syrphids don't have to return to their nest as bees do. So forcing bees have to return to their nest, it limits their area in which they can forage because they have to return to their nests. And syrphids don't have that, so they can fly farther and they can carry pollen a lot farther compared to other insects. And so that really contributes to their importance maybe into our ecosystem stabilities and plant fitness. I happened, when I was researching syrphids and pollinators, this came up. I didn't know that syrphids were commercially available. I think it's relatively new. So companies are starting to capitalize on syrphids. And so I think polyfly is only available in Europe, but I'm not totally sure. But you can purchase syrphids for example, your greenhouse. And the syrphid you can purchase, it's this Australinus Anius. It's a common lagoon fly. It's found in Europe and North America. And that study that I showed you a bit in the previous slide, this family, this genus Australinus, had the highest carrying capacity of the syrphid flies. And so they're used in greenhouses. They're starting to become very popular. I don't think they're that expensive. This is a cucurbit of some sort, that inside of cucurbit plant of someone. So yeah, you can check those out, but that's kind of fun. So wasps, I feel, are also a bit underappreciated. And so the wasps, their diet, they require meat. They're a carnivorous insect species, but they also require nectar. And so as they visit flower to flower collecting nectar, they inadvertently transfer pollen from plant to plant. And in some cases, it makes them more efficient pollinators than honeybees. There was an example out in California where the Vespid wasp, the yellow jacket, was found to be more efficient for one species of plant they studied this on than the honeybee actually. And so some of your wasps, they vary. They can be very hairy. The flower traits for wasps are usually white, dull in color. Your Culver's root is known to attract a bunch of different wasps. And Culver's root was part of my study as well. And I did find a lot of wasps on the Culver's root. And flowers, usually the nectar is very accessible because their tongue is very shallow. They don't have a long tongue compared to, for example, your moths. And here's a scolid wasp, which scolids are common visitors of black-eyed and brown-eyed Susans also. They're important pollinators of orchids. And we have a lot of orchids in Maryland. I didn't realize this till I Googled it, but I was surprised. I was like, wow. There's not a lot of research on the orchids in Maryland, but we have a lot of orchids, and wasps are common pollinators of orchids. So that was pretty neat. And I have an example on that on the next slide. But you also have these pollen wasps, and they're vegetarian wasps. They're in the Vespid family, so they're closely related to yellow jackets, I guess, but they've just evolved to rely on a pollen diet rather than a carnivorous diet. They rely on a pollen diet, and unfortunately they're not found in Maryland. They're found on the West Coast, in California, in the middle of the country. But I thought that was a fun fact to share with y'all. The flower wasps are found in Maryland, Thinidae, and they're important biocontrol agents. They're larvae parasitize scarab beetles underground, but these are also the orchid pollinators, and these orchids will mimic a female wasp through chemical sense and through visual cues, and the male will try to come and mate with this female mimic, and through that process the pollen gets collected and dispersed accidentally. When I looked at this species in Maryland, it's not terribly common. I was cleaning out our insect collection 2 weeks ago, and I found a whole box of these, and I was super excited to see how much diversity Thinidae have in Maryland. But there's actually not a lot of, they're not very high in abundances. 84 observations, 4 species. So if you see one of these, it would be fun to take a photo and upload it to iNaturalist. So nocturnal pollination, this was a lot of fun to research, and I'm excited to talk to you about this. It kind of makes me want to go back and almost redo my project and look at what's visiting my plants at night. Too much work, I can't do that, I have to graduate, but it was very cool. So moths, the adults are generalist nectivores. They have these long tongues. They're part of Lepidoptera family. And there's a lot of pros, maybe evolutionarily speaking, why insects decided to visit flowers at night. There's an absence of predators, and they also can avoid direct competition. A lot of those insects, both appreciated and underappreciated, visit the flowers during the day: the beetles, the bees, the wasps, the butterflies. So why not just visit the flower when there's less competition? And so many, the most common families we have in Maryland: the Sphingidae, the hawk moths, the Noctuidaes, and the geometrids. And because of their abundance of noctuids and geometrids, they're probably important pollinators, but we just don't notice it a lot because we're not out at night, and you probably need a night light. It's hard to see them. But many of the flowers too that moths visit are also visited during the day. So you see really a diversity of pollinators that visit these flowers both day and night. The flowers that attract moths tend to be in clusters. This is a pink flower, but they tend to be a little more dull in color and white, which during night maybe makes sense. The whites maybe are easier to find when it's dark out. Ample nectar, because they have these long tongues, and flowers tend to open in the afternoon or at night. And sometimes you had a few examples of flowers actually changing their color at night to attract moths. And so I think it's just been assumed, how do moths transfer pollen? Well, they have this long tongue and they have their mouth parts. So I guess pollen gets stuck to their tongue and to their mouth parts, and they go from flower to flower, and that's how they transfer pollen. But actually a study showed that the pollen spread on the underside of their thorax, on their chest here. And so as the moth gets close, it's hanging out on the flower, maybe some pollen gets on its chest there. And that's how it transfers pollen from flower to flower. And that's maybe how they're pollinating, contributing to the pollination ecosystem service. So we can all do something, and this is a nice lead way into the study, talking about urban gardens. But no-mow zones are really common. Also no-mow months. In April, I think we have a no-mow April, and when I was up in Pennsylvania at Penn State, it was no-mow May, just because it's a bit colder there. And so these really help with our providing food and resources for springtime insects. And turning off our lights. So moths are important pollinators. They're important to ecosystem stability, for many birds and bats and stuff. And so there's a whole, there's many studies on artificial lighting, but they show that they're not really that great for moths. Maybe turning off your lights, reducing artificial lighting. It's also bird migratory season. So reducing artificial lighting and such is really good because it disrupts migration patterns of birds. So it's a good time of year to kind of turn off and to minimize artificial lighting. So I'm gonna wrap up the presentation with a fun study about community urban gardens. And I read this and I'm like, gosh, I would love to share this with y'all because as master gardeners, I think there's a lot of urban community gardens that y'all are part of and participate in. And so the study, so there's lots of roles that a community garden serves. But the study, and I can send this to y'all if you want, the study looked at the role of urban community gardens in their role in ecosystem services. And those ecosystem services can be pollination, it can be biocontrol, providing habitats for urban wildlife, regulating climate change, stormwater runoff, and just recreation. I focused a little more on the ecosystem services. There's also, this paper talks about a big cultural component of community gardens, and I'm not really going to go into that. But it showed that these community gardens, they function as corridors for urban wildlife. And so they really support ecosystem services, especially those from arthropods. So they're really important to have around. These green spaces are important to have around. And that's kind of wraps up my talk a little bit. So you can email me with questions. I'm happy to share references. I have a next slide, a little bit about my research. If y'all wanted to hear a little more about that, I wasn't sure how much time I would have left and how many questions y'all would have. But I can go on and tell you a little bit about my research if you're interested. But I hope you enjoyed the talk.
Thank you, Katie. I think that you have time. If you willing to speak to the group, that would be great.
She does, and we don't have very many questions. But one of my questions was going to be what you were doing research on. So you're answering my question.
Okay, so I'm a fourth year student in the Espindola lab, and I study plant pollinator interactions. And so specifically, my project looks at the effect of floral additions on arthropod biodiversity and plant fitness. And so floral additions come in the form in my project of flower strips. I planted these annual wildflower strips, and I planted them next to a soybean field. And then within the soybean field, I planted this red clover, I interplanted this red clover between my rows of soybean. And so I looked at the impact of these added floral resources on arthropod, the number of different species of arthropods, how abundant they were, and then the repercussions of adding these floral resources. Do they act as a pollinator sink, or do they act as a source? And how adding these floral resources and affecting pollinators, it attracts a bunch of pollinators, how that has repercussions into our wild plant fitness. And this, I just had a graph. It is it's a log of my data, but it's just an order of magnitude. So 2, it represents about 80 or 90 or so counts. But you can see the most common visitor to these wildflower strips here was the scollid wasps, which I was a bit surprised about. And so you can see I have quite a few of these underappreciated pollinators that I talked about in my wildflower strips. So the weevils and the scarab beetles make up way more number of visitors, comprise a lot more number of pollinators than my apidae, which are your honeybees and your bumblebees and such. So this is kind of what my project focuses on a little bit. I looked at the cross benefits of edamame, and that was my first chapter, and then my second and third chapter focus a little more on biodiversity and wild plant fitness. So
you're actually in the writing phase of your dissertation.
I'm processing all my data right now. So I have thousands and thousands of insects that I collected. And so I'm in the lab every day trying to identify them. And I'm getting there.
Yeah. Okay,
yeah.
so we've got a couple of questions. So the first, when you were talking about the pollinator wasps, I've got a question here asking, are these particularly aggressive like yellow jackets or paper wasps?
No, they're not. I'm pretty sure they're solitary, and yeah, they're not aggressive. You could, with even some of the scolids, for example, which are here, they were the most common visitor of my wildflower strips, and I would honestly just go kind of pick them up by the wings and stick them in an ethanol jar. They're not aggressive at all. They kind of leave you alone. They really don't want to be bothered. So they're fine. If you pick them up and shake them, they're going to sting you, but in general, they're kind of harmless, I would say.
Okay, and just have some questions just coming in. We've got somebody who wants to know species of bee pollinates squash blooms. This person's noticed in the morning when the blooms open that bees have often spent the night in the bloom.
Yeah, so that's your Peponapus prenosa. It's the squash bee, and they are native to the southern part of the United States and Mexico, to more of your deserts. And through the domestication of squash, of cucurbits, they have followed this domestication process and have made it up to really throughout North America. They're found up into Canada and stuff. And so what happens is they're specialists on cucurbits, on pumpkins, and the female nests in the ground. They're solitary, they nest in the ground. So at night, the female will return to her nest. The male bees have nowhere really to go, so they hang out and sleep inside the flowers. And the squash flowers, they open like at 5 in the morning. I did some research on those when I was at Penn State, and it was horrible to go out there because we had to get out there at like 4 or 5 in the morning to be able to count what's visiting these squash flowers because they open so early. But the males would often hang out there and sleep overnight. And that's also, it's showing that these flowers and these diversity of plants really provide habitat and shelter for many different insects, including your male bees, for example. So that's what you were seeing.
It's interesting. So somebody else is asking, in your research, you state that the effects of floral plantings, and they want to know if you could say more about what effects and effects on what that you're looking at.
So I am, it's a bit of a complicated setup design, but I have the wildflower strips, and then at different distances from these wildflower strips, I planted native plants to Maryland at different distances, and I kept them in pots. That was the picture you saw of the megachilid going into my pot. And then I was just looking at how those, as a consequence of planting this very rich floral wildflower strip, what did it do to visitation to our wild plant community? And I did this at different distances from the wildflower strip. So I measured what was visiting my wild plants, and I collected the seeds, and I'm measuring reproductive output. So how many seeds were produced and the weight of those seeds. And so I can see, broadly speaking, the management practices, how that impacts a wild plant community. And that's a bit overlooked, the wild plants in our surrounding communities. And as we saw with this study in the Netherlands, they're not doing too well. So that was the goal. That's what I'm interested in. I hope that answered your question.
Just somebody else here who just they've made a comment about having planted mountain mint last year, and how all the little flowers are just covered with pollinators, and wasps and bees that they hadn't seen before and things like that, and they're just making the observation that
Yeah, mountain mint's a great,
how much fun they had with the mountain mint last year.
and it smells really good. It's a great, yeah, it's a great pollinator friendly plant to have around. And honestly, back to someone's comment about the aggressiveness of wasps, you know, they're on the flowers, they're busy trying to collect nectar. The bees are busy collecting pollen. They kind of don't really, I don't want to say don't notice you're there, but they kind of ignore you. They're busy doing their thing. So yeah, that plant is crazy with the amount of biodiversity it gets from insects.
And just another person who's commented that they really like that no mow zone sign, and want to know if it's actually available.
I think it is. I've seen it. People put it in their
Oh,
yards.
it looks like it's from the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, in fact.
Yeah, you can. I'm not sure where you can purchase or buy it, but you do see it in people's yards. And so, just this public awareness campaign, people put it in their yards. I rent, so I can't put it in my yard, but they'll put it in their yards as demonstrating why we're not mowing. And it's just to create this public awareness that, you know, it's good to have little flowers hanging out in your lawn. They're pretty too. It's these beautiful dandelions that come up. I'm not sure why we don't like them so much, but I'm very biased. I love flowers and pollinators. So, but yeah, you can probably just Google where to find these, but you definitely see them around.
Or go to maybe the dnr.maryland.gov/wildlife.
There was Maryland recently passed a new law that if you wanted to convert your lawn into a natural habitat for pollinators or such, you are allowed to do that. I guess before homeowners would restrict you from being able to do that, and now you're able to do that. There was a lawsuit a few years ago, and I guess in doing so you have to get certified, and they give you a sign to put up in your lawn that says certified pollinator habitat by the state of Maryland or something. I would have to reread the law a little bit, but there's a law, and you probably get a sign associated with that if you're going to convert your lawn into a habitat friendly environment. I mean, a pollinator friendly habitat, sorry.
So I've got somebody asking exactly what type of mountain mint it was, and if you go up into the chat, the person who actually put this in actually has identified it. It's Picanthenum muticum. I'm sure I did not pronounce that well, but they have indicated it. And I've got another question about whether the mountain mint spreads, which I believe it does.
I don't know much about the mountain mint, to be honest with you. I know it's often recommended in pollinator gardens and such, but yeah, I don't get the impression it's weedy, but honestly, y'all would know better than I would about that.
Just somebody else wants to know where to get light bulbs, some Project Porch light bulbs. You probably don't know. I would suggest that if anybody's interested, you might try Googling it.
Friendly light bulbs, you said?
Did they say, going back, get the light bulbs, Project Porch light bulbs.
Okay, Project Porch light bulbs. Okay, cool. Project Porch light bulbs. Okay, cool. And I guess that will help with some of your artificial lighting. Okay, cool. Thank you for that.
Oh, and we've got lots of discussion now going on in the chat about mountain mint. Yeah,
if anyone's interested in some of the papers or resources that I shared, just email me, and or if I can share it with you, Linda, and you can share it with everyone. I'm happy to share some of those papers.
So this is a question from me. I'm always thinking about what I can do to make my yard more pollinator friendly, and particularly what I could do to provide more habitat. You know, probably what are the most important things, or, you know, if you could only do one or two things, you know, what would have the biggest bang?
Goodness. Probably having a diversity of flowers. So not just planting a few annuals or such, but having some perennials, having some annuals. So diversity of flowers, and I would lean towards native. I think would be the two top priorities. Because diversity of flowers, it allows a diversity of pollinators to visit them, and you're supporting a whole diversity, a whole community of pollinators. So I would say those would be the top two things: native and diversity of flowers, and plant types. Maybe less curation of your garden, maybe just letting some of the sticks hang out there because they provide some habitat for some bees, like this nesting megachilids. If the I know the clover's root will die back every year, and sometimes those sticks have some bees hanging out inside of them. They nest inside of them, so that may help. I tried to look for information on that, and I couldn't really find a lot. But yeah, and not spraying. It also helps to not use mosquito. I think people go and like fog their yard or such for mosquitoes, and that kills off a lot of our pollinators. So, you know, just chemical free is always a good thing.
Here's a good question that just came in. What role does having access to water play for pollinators? Is it beneficial to have a small pond, or even a bird bath? Or
the pollinators also get through nectar. They can get water and liquids through the nectar. And maybe in Arizona, where it's maybe more desert like, it's better to have some water. But there's so much water retention, I feel, around Maryland, and that I wouldn't worry too much about putting a pond out for your pollinators necessarily. Having that, it is considered a little bit of a, if you do have a pond of water, it does, you know, it is a breeding ground for mosquitoes, which are great for bats, but I know that they're problematic. They bite and they vector some diseases. So it's like a pro and con a little bit with the ponds. But I think there's enough water hanging around in Maryland, and it rains enough that I don't think they're lacking water sources, to be honest.
and I've just had somebody point out that the Xerxes Society has a PDF on how and when to cut stems to provide the best habitat for pollinators. So
Oh, wonderful. Yes. Yeah, the Xerxes Society has some great resources for pollinators, and they have resources beyond just bees, which was nice. I found some of my information that I shared with you from the Xerxes Society. So,
and that seems to be it.
cool. I will stop sharing.
Thank you very much.
Screen.
Yes. Hey, thank you, Carol. And hey, thank you, Katie. I was going to kind of wrap things up here, and thank you for your presentation. I'll probably reach out to you maybe next day or so, Katie, on a couple of follow-up things I have in mind for you. If you're available, I'll try to send you an email, maybe reach out to you tomorrow. I'm doing a little bit of planning for classes and things, and I had a couple of ideas for you. So
Okay,
I'll
wonderful.
reach back
Yeah,
in.
please feel free to reach out. Thank you all so much
Mhm.
for inviting me to speak with you. I had a lot of fun putting to talk together too. So.
Awesome. Thank you again, Katie. And also a few things to wrap up. Congratulations to all the Master Gardeners for all the years of their service they've given to the program. Appreciate it immensely. Say that on behalf of all Extension. And as we talked about, we have our June 6th, our picnic on June 6th. For those folks who haven't done their background checks, keep an eye out for them. If there's anything I can do, try to help out. Let me know. If you need to pick up your name badges, they are in the Ballard room. The Ballard room's unlocked. It's in it's on the bookcase. When you turn to the right, it's in a white box. The service pins, I think Linda Barrett's having those, and she's reorganizing, working on those. So they're not here right now, but the name badges are if you're around. There's a couple items that have come in and are left on the table here in the Ballard room. That's the general place when we get items from Amazon or whatever. I keep them, I put them there for you guys to pick up. There's a bag of, I think, like Biotone and a package of Gonfrina seed, but that's there. That's open whenever the building's open too. So as things come in, we'll put those there. Just kind of give you heads up on that. And I think at this point, I've just want to thank everyone. Again, thank Katie. I hope you guys go out and enjoy the rest of the day and get some gardening done. So I will see some of you hopefully here soon, and we'll wind things up here today. Thank you, everyone.